And actually, the first thing that I want to cover inside of variables is going to be the naming conventions. All right, so for naming conventions with Python, it's really common, and yes, I did mean to say Python. With Python, it's really common in order to name a variable. For example, let's say we want some vector. Okay, so this vector, we're going to name it with an underscore. So we can do that in R, and that's just fine. It's kind of going to be up to you how you want to name things. And so let's say that this vector is going to be 1, 2, 3. And by the way, if you watched our last video, then you would have already seen this, and we're going to cover this just a little bit in the commands as well. So this is our combine function, so this is just going to kind of create a vector for us. So some vector, there's one naming convention with the underscore, and if we want to in R, we can also say another vector. In this case, we're using a decimal instead of an underscore, and that's perfectly acceptable in R, whereas in Python it is not acceptable because something like that would imply you're either trying to access an attribute or a method of this thing right here. But in R, this is treated just like this underscore. So we're going to do this again, and we'll give it something else. Let's say C456. So in this case, let's just go ahead and make sure that both of these look good. So we're going to have some vector, and that's 1, 2, 3, another vector, and 4, 5, 6. So everything is good there. We have those two common naming conventions. If you look in the upper right, we also have those values inside of our global environment. So we can see another vector and some vector up here. And there are, of course, other conventions like camel case that is commonly used in things like Java and JavaScript. So where we would have something like variable name, and so this one right here, we're just going to call that 3. So this is our variable name, or we could call that some variable. Okay. And then equally, we could have done an uppercase S for that some variable. When introducing this section, I did say that we were going to be editing variables and updating variables, and that there was a slight difference between those. And so here's where we're going to illustrate that. So here we have editing variables, so I'll just say editing vars. For editing variables, there's actually this really nice command, and again, we're getting a head start on some of these commands. It's just kind of the nature of things. Not everything can be split up nicely into sections. So we have this really cool fix command. So let's go ahead and fix, actually, just to make this easier for typing, I'm going to, instead of using our another vector or some vector, I'm actually just going to reset x. So in this case, we're going to set x to, by the way, I don't want to give you the impression that I always use this symbol instead of equals when creating vectors, so let me actually just go ahead and use the equal sign just to illustrate there's no difference in this case, outside of very few cases. All right, so x equal, and we're going to go with 1, 3, and 5. Okay, so set x. Now if we want to use this fix, and this is what I mean by editing variables, if we want to fix x, then we can hit that, and this is really cool. We get this pop-up, and we can see where x is. So if I wanted to, I could change this value. So I'm going to change the 5 to 0, and I'm going to save that. And then we can see in the upper right, in our environment variables right here, we can see that x is now 1, 3, and 0. And then let's illustrate that back down here in the console. So if I run x, then we have 1, 3, and 0 now. So it's actually really great. It's an awesome function to have that can really make it handy for changing these things around. Let's do one more fix here, just to illustrate one more thing. And that is that we don't have to leave the same number of values in here. So I'm going to put that 5 back in, but it'll be on the end. So now I've just created a longer vector. So whenever we do a fix, we can really change things however we want. So it's a really nice way to kind of easily, in an almost GUI kind of way, edit your variables, which we could have changed values in other ways, which we'll look at in the future when we take a closer look at vectors and matrices. But in this case, just be aware of the fix. We can do the same thing. It doesn't have to be a vector. Let's fix y, for example. So y is true. We could change that, and we could change that to anything we want. It doesn't have to be Boolean anymore. Let's set it to 3.5, and that'll give us this. Also, if you're curious to see the output as soon as you're done fixing it, then what we could do is fix x, and before you actually run this, do the semicolon and x. So then we'll run it, and we're going to change this. Let's just change it to 1 through 3. And so now we have the output. All right, so that is what I meant by editing variables. So it's a really nice thing to have. And let's go ahead and move on to updating variables. All right, don't freak out. Yes, I intentionally cleared the console. I was getting tired of working at the bottom, and you may have been tired of watching everything entered at the bottom of the screen as well. So let's get back to updating variables, updating vars. So it happens quite often where, whether you're doing something in data science or just programming in general, where you want to increment or update the value of a variable. So this differs from fixing because we're actually talking about just setting it equal to some new value. If you're incrementing, you may be incrementing just by 1, you may be incrementing by 2. Well, it doesn't really matter. So in Python, if you were to do that, you would do plus equals. So we'd have x plus equal 1. But in R, if we run this, then we get an error. Also, if you were to do something like this in, say, JavaScript, you might have x plus plus, right? Okay, so in here, that's not incrementing anything for us. We could add a 1 to it. And by the way, right now we are operating on a vector. So what we'll see is that it does add that value to each of these elements in this vector, but it didn't change over here in our global environment. So the values remain the same. All that did was just display it for us. What this means is that in R we have to explicitly update a variable. Let's actually go ahead and set x equal to 5. And in this case, we're just going to illustrate that x needs to be updated explicitly. So x equals x plus 1. And then we'll show x after this. So x is now 6, as we verified right here by running it and getting the output, and we can also see it in the environment. So this is how we want to update variables with R, is by doing it explicitly. It's a slight disadvantage, but that's okay. There are a lot of advantages too. Okay, so at this point, we've covered the operators, both arithmetic and the logical operators. And then we've shown some naming conventions for variables, how to edit them using the fix command. And then we've also now taken a look at how you update them, and you need to do that explicitly. So here, what we're going to do is move on to the commands. So this is actually going to be shifted into another video. So when we come back to that video, this console will be cleared again.